weeks. We're in this season of vision, and we just said God is doing incredible things here at Grace. It's wonderful, it's powerful, and it's fun to be a part of, and we're trying to keep up with it. And so we said, to do that, we need to raise resources, and you were amazing with that as a church family, responding to that. And then I told you, the hard part is then we need to raise relationships, and that's the share your life with each other part, because there's a vulnerability there, there's an intentionality there that comes to really journeying through life together. And so we've been talking about that, sharing your life with each other here these last few weeks, and the way we've been talking about that is in this context of who, what, when. And we just said that if you're a Christ follower, the Bible would want you to have a who, what, when. And I want you to think about a who, what, when life and look at people through a who, what, when lens. And we just define that. And so we said we all need to have a who. Who is it that I'm helping I'm seeking to make Jesus make sense to? What does it take to reach those people that I'm trying to help Jesus make sense to? And then when does that actually occur on my calendar? So who is in my life and who am I inviting in my life to help make Jesus make sense? What am I actually doing about that? And then when is it on my calendar? And we've been talking about this what is kind of where we're at. And I showed you some of this last week, and we said that we need to start to put this what in there. Now, why do we do that? Well, we've been talking about because if you're a follower of Jesus, what followers of Jesus do is we apprentice under Jesus. We learn his ways and practice them, or we mirror Jesus. So we would want to act like, talk like, think like, love like, be motivated like the person of Jesus Christ. And if you were going to ask Jesus, Jesus, could you sum up why you came to the planet and what you came to do? I think where the verse that Jesus might send us to, or what he might say to us, is what he said in Luke chapter 19. He says, for the Son of Man is another name for Jesus. So Jesus came to seek and to save those who are lost. And if I'm his follower, I want that to be the primary drive of my life. I want to seek and tell of the salvation of Christ to those who are lost. So who, I'm looking for those folks who are lost. And then what is kind of the seeking part? What am I doing to help Jesus make sense to those people? And last weekend when we started talking about the what, I said this is the first couple things we need to do. One, we need to find that common ground. So what do? I go to people. I'm not asking them to come to me. So the church is not common ground. The Bible is not common ground. Christian subculture is not common ground. I'm going to people, to their place of need, to where they live and belong, and I'm bringing the gospel there. And then I'm communicating the gospel clearly. The gospel is the good news of Jesus, or the story of Jesus. So what is that? And I define this real quick. The story of Jesus is this, that God sent his son Jesus to earth as a man so that through his life, death, and resurrection, we could be rescued from sin, receive forgiveness, and embrace the abundant life that we were created to enjoy. So the good news is everything surrounding that. Everything about what's going on in my life, the sin in my life, everything about who Jesus is, his love, his compassion, his forgiveness, his truth, and then that whole life, that life that we were created to live. It's not prosperity gospel stuff. We weren't created to have Corvettes and Learjets and have your hair grow back. I'm not talking about that stuff. I'm talking about the inner life of fulfillment and joy and peace and the relief of anxiety and the certainty of salvation. We were created to live in that life. And so I go to that common ground, and then I tell that story clearly, and the parts of it that kind of apply to whatever relationship I have there. And then the third thing I said is where I want to pick up this weekend as we continue to talk about what. So the third thing I said was this: we're going to go to common ground, we're going to speak the gospel clearly, and then I said this: the gospel is always going to make the most sense when I hear and experience it simultaneously. So I'm going to live and I'm going to embrace, I'm going to welcome people into the family of God, because Jesus is going to make the most sense when I experience Jesus as I hear about him. So as the people of God reflecting Jesus, When I am loving towards someone, that is going to be the thing that helps the love of God make the most sense to them. When I forgive someone in my life, that's the thing that's going to make the forgiveness of Jesus make the most sense to them. When I am generous to someone in need, that's what's going to make the generosity of Jesus make the most sense to them. So the gospel always makes the most sense when it's experienced and heard, or you could flip it, heard and then experienced, but when those kind of two things go together. Now it's fascinating, when you look at Jesus and you look at his life, he did this all the time. He is a person who allowed us to hear and experience the truth simultaneously. And when you see him explaining his truth to people in the Bible, he was always doing those two things at once. He would talk about the forgiveness of sin, and he would then forgive a sinner's sin. He would draw them in and say, like, everybody else devalues you because you're a sinner, I value you, I'm seeking to save you, and then I'm going to forgive you. He would talk about his love for people, and then he would love the most unlovable people. The prostitutes, the tax collectors, they would have been the very bottom of the rung in that day, and he would love them and draw them in. He would talk about his compassion, and then he would be compassionate. He would recognize that you needed healed, or that you were hungry, or that you were afraid, and you would experience the compassion of Jesus. But Jesus was always inviting people in. He was not telling people, you have to come and find me. And that process of inviting people in is a concept that is called hospitality. And Jesus practiced hospitality. Now, I want to just talk about this word for a minute, because we use it all the time, but the Bible would use it differently, okay? So when we think about hospitality, we think about having people over, or we think about being kind, or clean the house, there's company coming, or when I went to the hotel, they had a warm cookie for me when I checked in that night. We think in those terms. Biblical hospitality is different than that. So I'm going to call it biblical hospitality so we don't confuse the two things. The way we use the word is not wrong, it's just different than what the Bible means, okay? So Jesus would practice what I'm going to call biblical hospitality. And biblical hospitality is this: it's inviting in those who are near and far so the love of Jesus could be experienced in tangible ways. So when I practice biblical hospitality and the hospitality that Jesus practiced, he's inviting into his life, into his personal circle. He's inviting in people who are near to him, people who are far from him, but he's not just being kind and just being sociable. He's inviting them in so that they can experience his love in a tangible way, or so they can experience the gospel as they learn about it. So both those things happen at once. So you'll see that happen again and again. Jesus invited people that were close to him in, clarified what he meant so that they could hear the truth and experience it. He would have done this with a guy named Nicodemus. Nicodemus was a Bible scholar who had the Bible all mixed up. And Jesus is like, it's okay, bro. Come in here. I'll meet with you. I'm not rejecting you. I'm not scorning you. I'm not lecturing you. But let me explain to you the difference between what you think and what is true. And then I want to invite you to receive what's true. And Nicodemus would have been close. There was another guy that was far, far from God. His name was Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus was a tax collector, which meant he was a thief, a liar, and a traitor, hated by the Romans and the Jews, as far from God as you could get. And when Jesus saw Zacchaeus, he's like, hey, Zacchaeus, let's have lunch together. And he invited Zacchaeus in. He's like, Zacchaeus, I'm going to teach you about forgiveness. I'm going to teach you about grace. I'm not going to just scorn you and yell at you or cut you off because you're a jerk to people. I'm going to invite you in so that you can hear the gospel, experience the gospel, and be changed by it. And the Bible says that Jesus did this with tax collectors. He did it with prostitutes. He did it with all kinds. The Bible uses this word notorious sinners. All these people were always being invited in by Jesus. He also did this to people who were the most unvalued people in the culture. So if you think of the people that you might value the least, Jesus would invite them in. In the ancient world, the two groups of people that were the least valued in the ancient world were children and women. They were both considered disposable. So when Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me," that was a revolutionary thing, because the Romans practiced what was called exposure. You'd have a baby, you would leave it outside for 3 days. If it survived, you kept it. If it died, you were done. Totally did not value children. So the idea that the children could come hang out with the most important guy in the room was mind-boggling. The same thing was true with women. Women were thrown away. They were considered property. You guys were considered property. It's foreign to our thinking, but that's the way they thought. So when Jesus healed women or invited women to be his disciples too and to follow him, when he said there's no male, female, Jew, Gentile, like when all that was said in the Bible, it was mind-boggling because they were so unvalued. So Jesus would take an unvalued part of a society or a person, and he would invite them and say, "I give you value, and I'm gonna interact with you as value, as people that I love." He would even do that with his enemies. So people who hated him, people who tried to kill him, some of his last words were, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." And he was still like clearing the path to be close to him, right? That's biblical hospitality. It's actually exactly what Jesus does for us, what he offers us in our salvation. And if you've received it, then you have come close to God. If you have not received Jesus' salvation yet, the invitation is still open to you. The Apostle Paul says in Ephesians chapter 2 that we are at one time alienated from God, but now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far from God have been brought near through Jesus. Like we were welcomed in and we were brought in. So if you're a Christ follower, Christ followers are the beneficiaries of divine hospitality. The invitation that I can come to Christ. And this is how Jesus functioned. When the Bible says he made his home among us, it's very interesting that Jesus didn't come down to the planet, set himself up on the highest mountain and say, "Come find me." He wasn't like, "Climb this mountain, pick a flower, bring it to these ninjas. Come." Pretty sure that's Batman 1. But like he didn't. It wasn't like, "Come up here, ring a gong, and bring some fruit." He didn't ask us to go to him. He came to us. He found the common ground. He made his home among us. And then he invited us. He doesn't put up barriers to him. First, you got to go to church. Then you got to learn some prayers. Then you got to give some money. And then you got to stand on your head. He doesn't put barriers to him. He puts invitations from him. And we would call that, the Bible calls that biblical hospitality. I'm inviting people in, and if you're a Christ follower, it's recognizing that I'm the benefactor of that. I'm the benefactor of Christ's divine hospitality, right? Now, I tell you all that real quick because then you go into the rest of the Bible, and what you find in the rest of the Bible is God speaking to his followers saying, "Now you be hospitable." It's really fascinating. He says, "I want you to be hospitable." So 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 9 says to Christ followers, "Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling." Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2, "Don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it." Romans chapter 12, verse 13, "Share with the Lord's people who are in need, practice hospitality." The Bible even says that you're not allowed to be a leader in the church, in the local church, if you don't practice hospitality. So Titus chapter 1 is one of the places where God lays out the qualifications for what the Bible calls eldership or oversight or leadership within the church. And this is some of the qualifications. Since an overseer manages God's household, he must be blameless, not overbearing, not quick-tempered, not given to drunkenness, not violent, not pursuing dishonest gain. Rather, ready? He must be hospitable, one who loves what is good, who is self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. So it's a big, big priority to God. And he's not, when God uses that word, when he uses it differently than we would tend to hear it. So God's not talking about networking. He's not talking about socializing. He's not talking about something that's self-benefiting, like a housewarming party, and we had the neighborhood over. He's not talking about entertaining friends. He's not talking about hosting the holidays. All those things are great. Nothing at all wrong. It's just not what he's talking about. When God talks about hospitality, biblical hospitality, he's saying something different. He's saying hospitality is inviting in an outsider, someone who's out of my circle into my circle. Biblical hospitality is welcoming the one who is far, even a stranger. I'm going to welcome you into my circle. Biblical hospitality is the sacrificial meeting of relational, social, physical, and spiritual needs. And I'm going to open my life to do that. And when you look at Jesus, if you're a Christ follower, who is our example and our pattern, to be a Christian, the word literally means to be like Christ. I am taking on the traits of Jesus. I'm seeking to save those who are lost. And one of the main ways that Jesus did that, the way that he made himself make sense, was he would practice hospitality. So who is in my life? Who am I inviting into my life? What am I going to do about that? I'm going to go to common ground. I'm going to speak the gospel clearly. And then I want to put out that I'm going to offer or become a person of hospitality. Okay? Now, what I want to do this weekend, I want to lay out that concept because it's a big one and we don't talk about it a ton. It's a big one and it's an important one. Most of the time when we think about hospitality, we think, well, I'll be nice and have somebody over. And the Bible's like, nope, practice it. Well, if we have time, we'll set up the holidays. Nope, you have to practice. You offer hospitality. So the Bible talks about it on a different level. So it's a directive, it's a command, it reflects the heart of Jesus. And what I want to spend the rest of our weekend talking about is, what do I actually have to do that? So if I'm going to be a hospitable person, how does my life have to change? What decisions would I make? What would I do to actually do that? Okay, so I got 5 things for you that will help us to practice hospitality, okay? So here we go. If I'm going to practice hospitality, what do I need to do? Number 1 is this. I have to look for the outsider. I have to look for the outsider. And this is what Hebrews is saying. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. I'm going to look for the outsider, okay? Now, why is this hard for us? This is hard for us because of our human nature, okay? There's nothing wrong with you. It's just the way that we're wired. And it's hard for us to be hospitable because it works against our wiring a little bit. What we do as human beings is we look for people who are like us. And the more alone we feel, the more desperately we search for sameness. So I look for people who are like me, and the more alone I feel, the more desperately I search for sameness. And when I feel alone, my tendency is not to look for other people who are alone. My tendency is to look for someone who is the same as me, right? This is why all of us at one time or another, when we walked into a lunchroom in elementary or junior high, felt so wildly insecure. Because even today, this happens to me. When I go into a group of people and I don't know who to sit with, you immediately start looking and say, who can I sit with? Who can I sit with? Who do I know? Who looks like me? Who looks like they don't already have a group of people around them? If you've ever traveled out of the country and been in another country that speaks a different language, that's why it's such a relief when you find someone who speaks English. You're like, I can be known, I can be understood, right? And we're Americans. You ever heard that joke? What do you call it if you know 3 languages? You're trilingual. What do you call it if you know 2 languages? You're bilingual. What do you call it if you know 1 language? An American, right? Like we're bad about that. So like when we go and we travel, if I can find somebody who looks like me, talks like me, I'm going to gravitate to this person. By the way, this is why it's so hard to break cycles in your life, whether it's dysfunctional cycles or addiction cycles. Because when I break cycles in my life, I have to break relationships in my life, and then I'm alone. I'm alone. And what happens then, the reason I'm so tempted to relapse is because I know you're bad for me and I know you're dysfunctional, but at least I know how you work. And it alleviates that aloneness. That's why you'll go back to a bad relationship. We broke up because we're the worst thing that ever happened to each other, but at least we kind of know how to dysfunction together. Because we are always trying to alleviate that aloneness. Now here's the thing, ready? If you're a Christ follower, Jesus says, ready? You're never alone. Jesus says, am with you always. So as a Christ follower, I'm never alone. God is always with me. And what that does is that gives me strength to flip the script and to be hospitable. I'm not alone because Jesus invited me in and alleviated my aloneness. And if I'm going to be hospitable then, when I walk into a room with Jesus, the way that I'm hospitable is I look for the one who's alone and I invite them into relationship, into my circle. So to be hospitable, I kind of start there. I would look around and say, well, who's alone? Who needs a friend? And guys, let me tell you something. One of the most powerful things you can do in life is walk across the room. And when you see someone by themselves, and you see someone, and we can tell, like when someone's lost or confused or intimidated, when you walk across the room and you go to that person and you're hospitable, sit with me, can I help you? Do you know anybody? Hi, my name is, right? When I do that and I alleviate that aloneness, I am acting out the gospel. I am demonstrating the way that Christ sought me and invited me to be close to him. So I look for the outsider. Here's the second thing. If I want to practice hospitality, I'm going to have to learn to embrace interruption. I'm going to have to learn to embrace interruption. And this is what Peter is talking about in 1 Peter 4. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling, okay? This is what happens. What hospitality does is it translates interruptions and interprets them as divine appointments instead of disappointing interruptions. And so when I'm offering or I'm thinking through a biblical hospitality lens, I realize God has brought this person in front of me as opposed to this person now is disrupting what I had planned for the day. Okay, now, let's talk about this. Because for some of you, you have a personality type where you look at this and you're like, Jeff, no problem. I love people. I'm a little ADD. I don't like to concentrate all day anyways. I just can't wait to be with people. I hate cubicles. I like it when the phone rings. I'm bored half of my life. I just like to roll with it. I love life like that. And you, that's wonderful. You probably are going to be good at interruptions. And the Bible would say, offer hospitality when those interruptions happen. Or you could be like me, who hates to be interrupted, right? My day is literally blocked out in 15-minute segments.
And if I have favored you, I will give you 15 minutes. Yes, Heidi, you may have 15 minutes. Yes, children, you may have I don't really do that, but kind of. But like, right? That's the way I am type A. I got a list. I have an agenda. I reviewed it before I went to bed last night, so I know exactly how to play it out in the day. I have my trip from my house to my office broken down into a 15-minute segment. In fact, it takes 17 minutes to make that drive, to be exact. I have all of that laid out. And to a person like me, God's going to say to me, offer hospitality and don't grumble about it. Because your time is not yours. And we talked a few weeks ago about how our money is not ours. God is the owner of our money. We are the managers of it. Therefore, he has the right to tell us how to spend it. Just like our money, our time is not ours. It is God, the Bible says, who gives life, and God who takes it away. My time is not mine, it's God's. Therefore, I am the manager of his time, not the owner of mine. And when God sends someone into my life who needs to experience the gospel, that is the plan, regardless of what I thought it was going to be. And this is what Peter's saying. He's saying like that is hard for some of you. So remember what God is doing. God sent this person to you because they need to experience the gospel. God sent this person to you because they need loved, because they need cared for, because they need heard, because they need help, because they need to know about Christ. And it's not an interruption. It's a divine appointment. As a Christ follower, I don't believe in luck. I believe that God controls everything. So it's a divine appointment. And as his follower, I have to receive it that way. Now, who set that example for me is Jesus. Did you know that over half of Jesus' miracles were interruptions? Somebody just bugged him. Somebody just reached out and touched him. Somebody just got in his way. Even his disciples were like trying to shoo people away. He's like, stop it. I want to see these people right now. And my life is an interruption to God's life. I'm pretty sure heaven was going pretty well for Jesus. I'm pretty sure he had it scheduled out nicely. And my need for him was an interruption to his life. He embraced that interruption, welcomed me in as a stranger. He was hospitable to me. And that's how I even know who he is. And so Peter says, yeah, guys, as his followers, that's part of the deal. Part of the deal. And he says, offer hospitality. And then I don't think he says without grumbling for no reason. Because if you're like me, it's kind of hard not to grumble about it. And I have to be reminded, and I have to be almost submissive to what God is asking me to do. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to embrace the interruption, right? I'm going to look for the outsider. The third thing I'm going to do is this. If I'm going to be hospitable, I have to open my personal spaces. I have to open my personal spaces. The Apostle Paul says something funny. We looked at this a little bit last weekend if you were here. He says this, yes, I try to find this common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I do everything to spread the gospel and to share in its blessings. If I'm going to be hospitable, I'm going to have to be willing to open my personal spaces. So let's talk about this for a second. Ready? Personal space is whatever and wherever I center my life. So it's whatever, personal space is whatever and wherever I center my life. So it's where you feel safe, you feel happy, you feel like this is the spot that you need at the end of the day. That can be everything from like your home. I would be that way with my home. Like Heidi and I, the reason we live where we live is because it's me. I need the downtime and the alone time. And so I love going home. I love being home. I like looking at my yard. I like looking at the water. I like being in my house. I pull in my driveway and like my shoulders relax. It's the space that I love to be in, and I love my family around me. That's my favorite thing in the world. That's my personal space, right? That's why I live down a long gravel driveway where you can't find me. And we have dogs, vicious dogs. We have cougars and tigers and bears. They'll kill you if you come down, right? So like that's my home, right? My personal space. Now, ready? Your personal space might be your friend group. So you might be like, I live alone, or my family's not that healthy, or I kind of hate being home. My personal space is my friend group. When I am with these people, I feel safe with these people. I draw joy from these people. I can't wait to be with these people. These people fill me up. They love me. Your personal space could be a friend group. Your personal space could be church. So you might look and say, it's when I'm at church, man. Like people understand me, they accept me, they love me. We talk about Jesus. Like it's my favorite thing to do. I love being at church. Your personal space is wherever and whenever you're kind of grounded, where you be like, this is where I need to be. It can be your family, it can be a physical home, it can be a set of friends, it can be a church. It really can be anywhere that you want it to be. Ready? If I'm going to be hospitable, then I am going to have to open those personal spaces. This is what the Apostle Paul says in Titus. It says he must be hospitable. It does not say that a leader of the church needs to be good at entertaining at his house. It doesn't say he's really got to decorate for the holidays. It doesn't say he has to be an extrovert who cannot wait to hang out with people. What it says is he must be hospitable. He must be willing to open these personal spaces and invite you in, right? So this is how this works. Now I'm out with my friends and there's an outsider. And a person is alone. And for whatever reason, they've interrupted our time together. We see a need, maybe they came up to us, who knows, but there's an interruption. And I was not looking forward to being with them. I was looking forward to being in my personal space. To be hospitable, I must open up. This is who I always hang out with. These are my homies I play basketball with. This is my thing. I must open up this space and invite that person in so that they can experience the gospel. I use the example of our home. So our home is important to me. Heidi's made it beautiful, and I love being there. And we like having people at the house, but that's on our own terms. If it's an interruption, I don't know. But when someone comes to my home, to my personal space, this is what happens. When someone comes to your personal space, our home revolves around the guest. So if you're our guest in our home, my home revolves around the guest. The conversations around the guest, the wants and desires are around the guest. What would you like to eat? Would you like to sit in here, or would you like to sit out by the fire? The needs revolve around the guest. Can I get you anything? Our behavior changes. I don't act the same if I have a guest in my home than if I don't have a guest in my home. And it's not hypocrisy. You're a hypocrite. No, I'm not. You just don't want me walking through the kitchen in my boxers if you're my guest, right? So I'm going to be considerate if you're my guest, right? When I welcome someone, if my personal space is my friend group and I welcome in, the friend group focuses on the guest. If the personal space is my church and somebody comes into my church, the church focuses around the guest. If you're a holy, righteous God who is sinless and a sinner walks in, you give your life to that sinner, Jesus. See, we've invaded his personal space. And instead of saying, whoa, I don't know if you read my resume, you're not allowed in here. He says, actually, I welcome you in. I will make myself make sense to you. I will interact with you on your terms. I will accept you as who you are because I focus around you. See how that works? If I'm going to be hospitable, I have to open my personal space. Here's the fourth one. If I'm going to be hospitable, I have to change the question. I have to change the question. Most of us, when we're thinking about people in our lives, ask a if question. We ask if I should invite them in. And we spend an extraordinary amount of time in our lives talking about who we should keep out of our lives. You know, that person is toxic. I'm just going to have to not have them in my life anymore. We'll talk about that one till the sun rises. That those people over there, if they get too close to us, you know how they are, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't have that type of person around. That person over there is high need. If you invite, they're like a stray cat. They're just going to come back and meow at the door. Like you can't get rid of. We should manage that. Like I don't know. Should we? I don't know. We'll talk about this at the holidays. Should we invite her? I don't know. Should we feel obligated? I don't know. Should we? Like we'll ask that if question again and again and again and again. If you want to be hospitable, you change the if to how. How do I invite them in? Jesus is never wondering if the gospel is available for you. He never thought that. He never was like, I don't know, those people, I don't know, should I let them have salvation? He never asked an if question. He asked a how question. How do we do this, Father? How do we make a way? How do we welcome? How do we forgive? Okay. Now, ready? A hospitable person asks a how question, and that how question is almost always difficult. It's not whether if I'm going to love my enemies or not. It's how do I do it? Okay, but she is toxic, and I gotcha. How do we do this? But we do need to be careful because of this person's weaknesses and our family member's weakness. So how is a very difficult question sometimes. It can be very complicated question sometimes because it's always messy to love people. Always messy to love people. But someone with the heart of Jesus, a heart of hospitality, is willing to embrace that mess. Like, let's figure this out. We want you to be a part. We want you to be connected. We want you to be in. How do we do that? And we're not considering whether or not we're going to extend the love of Jesus to somebody. We're thinking through how do we make Jesus make sense and allow you to experience that, okay? Last one. If I'm going to be a hospitable person, I have to become an inviter instead of waiting to be an invitee. I have to become an inviter instead of waiting to be an invitee, right? Now, this is the reason I put this one in here. Romans chapter 12 says this. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. And then it says, practice hospitality or do hospitality. That command to do hospitality or be hospitable applies to every follower of Jesus, right? So if you're a follower of Jesus, Paul's talking to you right here. God's talking to you through the Bible, okay? Now, this is why I put this one in here. When you hear a conversation like this, here's the temptation. Ready? Ready? I love you. Here's the temptation. The temptation is to critique everybody else around you. Yeah, Jeff, you tell them, big guy. You let them know they should be hospitable. And if you feel alone or you feel like an outsider, you'll hear a conversation like this and say, yeah, that's the way people should be treating me. Now, let me say this. If you're not a follower of Jesus yet, You're exactly right. That is the way that Jesus followers should be treating you. And if you have not been treated that way, and a church has closed its doors, or you have not been welcomed in, I'm sorry for that. You should have been treated with hospitality. And at Grace Church, we want to treat you with hospitality. Now, we're not that good at it because we're all kind of screwed up, right? So we're just trying to follow Jesus together, but we kind of do our best. But I want you to receive hospitality. So if you're not a follower of Jesus yet, and you say, yeah, that's the way people should be treating me, you're right. Christians should be treating you this way. If you're a Christ follower and you have that mindset, you're ignoring this. I love you, but you're ignoring this. And this is what's crazy about hospitality. As a Christ follower, the solution to the feeling that people have not been hospitable to you, the antidote to that is for you to be hospitable. And you feeling like people haven't been hospitable to you will go away when you're hospitable to people around you. Ready? If you're lonely, the antidote to loneliness is to look for lonely people and be an inviter. It's to go alleviate someone else's aloneness. If I feel alone and I see that you're alone and I invite you not to be alone but to be with me, guess what just happened to me? I'm not what? I'm not alone. See how it works? And so I become the inviter instead of waiting to be the invitee. If you have social anxiety and you're full of fear and you feel isolated, the way that you overcome those things is by being hospitable. You don't have to be an extrovert. You don't have to be Mr. or Mrs. like socialite. But you can invite in. You can love someone who's unvalued. You can alleviate aloneness. And as you do that, it will take out that anxiety and that fear. If you struggle to love your enemies, those people. The ones on the news. Oh, you mean the radicals on campus? No, the other news. Oh, you mean the right-wing conservatives? Those people. The way that you love an enemy is not to push them away, it's to invite them in. It's really hard to hate somebody that you're really committed to loving. And you draw them in instead of pushing them out. That's how you love them. So you practice hospitality. If you feel generationally separated, those young kids today, I don't understand them. They're tickety-tockety, right? If you feel, then be hospitable and welcome them in. Those boomers, they don't know nothing. Yeah, we hear you, but we have money, so we don't care what you think, right? So those boomers, well, how do you overcome that? You invite them in. Most older people are afraid of younger people. When a younger person invites them in, it's a welcomed invitation. Most younger people feel unseen by older people. When you see them and invite them in, it's a welcome invitation. It's hospitality. It's exactly what Christ did for you if you're a follower of Jesus Christ. If you feel disconnected from the church, sitting in church and waiting for someone to read your mind isn't going to make things any better. I love you. It's just not the way that works. Because everybody else is as broken as you are. So practice hospitality. Be in the life group, host it, go to the connect. It alleviates that disconnection. If you feel isolated, you put the phone down, you put the games away, you practice hospitality, and the isolation goes away. And this is why Peter looks and says, actually, with God's people, you have to do this. It's not necessarily going to come easy. It's not always simple, but the very obedience to the practice is the thing that alleviates the very thing that you are frustrated and feel distanced by. Right? So if I'm going to practice hospitality, I have to become the inviter instead of waiting to be the invitee, right? Now, there's two ways that this lands that I really want you to get your head around, okay? So first to those of you who are Christ followers, who, what, when? Who, what, when? Who? Who has Jesus brought into your life, or who are you inviting into your life? What? Common ground, clear gospel, hospitality. And if you are unsure about how to state your faith or to speak it out loud, and you're unsure about what to do with those in your life that you love, the who's in your life, I want you to understand that there is no greater tool for the illustration, proclamation, or personification of the gospel than hospitality. And the thing is that hospitality is not something you even have to be particularly good at to be well received. You don't got to be Joanna Gaines. You don't have to be Martha Stewart before she went to prison. You don't have to be. You don't have to be good at that stuff, okay? You have to have an open heart, an open life, and you have to look to love people the way that Jesus loved you, right? And that's one. Two, if you're not a follower of Jesus yet, this is what I want you to know. Jesus is a hospitable God. Jesus does not care how far you are from him. He doesn't care if you've gone to church your whole life, know the Bible inside and out, but fake your faith if you're nearer to him like Nicodemus was. And he doesn't care if you're whatever the modern equivalent of a tax collector is. He doesn't care how much junk you've done in your life. He doesn't care how much you've rejected him. He doesn't care how far away you've lived from him. His invitation to you is to come home and to come in. He doesn't care if you faked your religion your whole life and you know it in your head, but you don't actually believe it in your heart. His invitation to you is to come near and to come home because he's a hospitable God. And he loves you. He loves you, and he showed up in your world on purpose. Even this conversation right now is a divine appointment from God. You came to church. I'm talking about this. You happen to be around for this particular... Is all this a coincidence? Is that what we're going with? Or is a loving God who wants you? A loving God who gave his life for you. A loving God who spent his whole life illustrating that he's inviting you. Is he interrupting your life right now? So that you can know that you're not too far, you're not too fake, you're not too messed up, you're not too sinful, you didn't do the taboo thing. He already knows all your good, he already knows all your bad, and he's already chosen to love you and to accept you and welcome you in. And all a Christ follower is, if you're not a Christ follower, all a Christian is, all a real Christian is somebody who looks and says, I found out about that. We call it the gospel. I found out about that, and I was like, I'm invited, I'm in. It's what I need, it's what I want, it's what I've been searching for. And everybody who's a Christian at some point in their life heard a story like this, and for the first time in their life, that made sense to them. And that's just God interacting with you. And if you're not a Christ follower yet, and you're hearing the story, and for the first time in your life, it makes sense to you. There's a God who loves you, who will forgive you, who can change you, and who wants you just as you are. then all that God wants you to do is come to the party you've been invited to. He's been seeking you to save you because you're lost. Because you're lost. And when we kind of realize that, I'm lost. My life has not worked. It's not going to work. I don't even actually know how to make it work. All Jesus is saying is, I have a different life for you. Come home. And let's forgive your sin. Let's welcome you into a space you've never been before. And let's take this journey together. All right? I'm going to ask the band to come out, and they're going to sing a song. And the song is, I love it. It's a powerful song. And it talks about that awareness. Like I've come to these conclusions, and like these light bulbs have gone off. And then it talks about what I did with it. I just run to the Father. I just go there. And so we're going to sing this song. And if this song is your prayer, if it's where you're at, then I encourage you to ask God for his forgiveness, to accept his invitation to come home, and to become his follower. And if you aren't sure how to do that or what you want to do with that, I sit right up here when we're singing. You can come talk to me, and I'll try to help you with it, right? But if you're lost, come home. Come home, right? The invitation, the doormat's out, the house is unlocked, right? Come to the place where Jesus is inviting you to be, okay? Jesus, in these still moments, would you press into our hearts in very personal ways? And God, there's some that are listening right now, and they're wrestling with you. They know you're calling them home. They're battling that. God, would you just reassure them? Would you comfort them? Would you help them? Would you make sense to them? God, there's some of us who are your followers, and we know that we have locked the door in certain groups and people. And God, would you help us? Would you convict us? Would you change us, God, to open up our spaces again? So Jesus, thank you for your host. Thank you for welcoming us, inviting us, wanting us. And God, thank you for the change and the hope that brings in our life. In these still moments, God, as we sing this prayer, stir in our hearts.